Hi, Paul here. At Spitfire Audio, we have spent years capturing the piano. In concert halls, private studios, churches, with composers, artists and innovators, we've done everything from paper clips to practice felt, but still it feels like we haven't really scratched the surface. Because the piano isn't just an instrument, it has this symbiotic relationship with the player, and if the player is a composer, it often becomes the kind of linchpin of the process. It's the starting point from which an idea, however small and fragile, can then develop into something really epic. And that's why so many composers start their work on the piano. You know, and there's stories from songwriters like Jeremiah Freites really falling in love with a specific piano and that inspiring certain tracks and melodies, to Hans Zimmer sitting in the studio at Air in Lyndhurst Hall at night when everyone's gone home, playing the piano in that hall and it inspiring the next melody that he will use. It really does cover every genre. So what have I done today? I've used a few of these special pianos, including those two, the Jeremiah Freites piano, the Firewood piano, and the Hans Zimmer piano. And then there's a few other things in there as well, but those two are the kind of core of the sound. I've taken a really simple, really fragile idea, and then I've shown how you can develop that through different styles and then into a kind of really big epic finish. So first up, let's have a look at the idea that I had. I'm going to play it on the Firewood piano. So I've got a nice big reverb on it, a nice big hall sound. And apart from that, it's really just the close mic so that you get the kind of real feeling of intimacy, but just with a giant, lovely reverb on it. Now I've added, just for texture, I've added in quietly underneath that, the Hans Zimmer piano. And it's the super soft patch so that it's everything at the bottom two dynamics that was really, really hard to play. And they were played by hand. They're human played, softest dynamic you could get out of the piano in Air without it actually failing to voice a note. And those two together, I've added a few things to that at the beginning. So we've got some lovely stuff here from Hauschka. And these are built from those fabulous textures and experimental designs on the piano that Volker has made. So some really beautiful sounds here. And of course, in this library, there are loads and loads of fantastic experimental sounds using ping pong balls and all kinds of stuff with prepared pianos. It's a very, very deep library. But for this, I've just used these sounds. So the opening of the track, in its most kind of broken and fragile form, sounds like this. Now, that is repeated, and then we go into a section which is slightly more developed here, and I've brought in another piano, and this is the BBC SO piano, and that sounds like this. And as you can hear, it's in there quite quietly, but it's doing this kind of... So you've got extra kind of character sound in there. There's also some other stuff happening here. I've brought in some percussion. I've started to bring in some of the strings, like for example, so that's the Abbey Road 2 bass. The cello also comes in. So this section starts like this. So you get the idea. There's a few little sequency parts. We've got some gentle percussion and the strings come in. We've got some more stuff from Abbey Road 2, which are the fantastic solo strings that we recorded in Studio 2 at Abbey Road. Really designed to sound kind of this, with the same performance style as the amazing Eleanor Rigby string arrangement sound. So a lot of these sounds in there we were referencing back to the original multi-tracks and really making sure that we captured the performance style exactly. There's some cool stuff here from the Percussion Swarm library, which has got some amazing sounds in it. And we've got a bit of sound design here in Solar from the Mercury library. Why don't we play the whole track down? And I will then gradually go through and show you some of the sections. Okay, so that's the whole piece. So let's jump back to the strings, this section here. And I've got a variety of different things. I'm using some ensemble stuff here, which is Hans Zimmer strings, 60 violins. It's really just playing this kind of beautiful, silky, shimmery, soft thing going on. Here we have some fantastic sounds from fractured strings. So you've got a sound here that is created using the scale mode. I've programmed in that kind of C minor vibe. these kind of textures are quite hard to program with normal legato samples. So it's really useful having lots of great performance style samples in fractured strings and being able to use scale mode to access them. I love the sound of the Abbey Road 1 legendary low legato. Beautiful. There's nothing like the sound of the cellos and basses playing together. And then we saw the Abbey Road 2 stuff earlier. We've got two different string libraries here. We've got the Appassionata. And we've got the Abbey Road. So two very, very beautiful, sweet sounds there. You can see those sections, using those all the way through. Percussion-wise, we've got some interesting stuff. We've got some stuff from Abbey Road 1, some really useful boomy sounds. The toms are great as well. And actually what I've done on some of these is I've played them in and left quantize off, as you can see on this track with the taikos. This is something that I'm always adjusting and experimenting with. But what really happens is when you play stuff in, there is something that gives a kind of human feel. But if you play everything in like that, it can start to sound a little bit messy and chaotic. So what I'll often do is I'll have certain things that I'm going to quantize. For example, let's just see in the epic percussion part here, I've got the Hans Zimmer taikos. What am I using? It's a mixture of stuff. Not everything is quantized. That's interesting. This one is quantized to 16th notes at 84. So if I just solo that. And then we've got the bombos underneath, again, 86%. So have a listen to that one. And then you want the kind of overall effect to still have a humanity to it. And here's an example of of stuff where you can make your own sounds and you can put them in and add them into tracks and get all kinds of great sounds. So this is literally just, if I turn the reverb off, this is just the sound of a match. Recorded nice and close. And I've used it for a variety of different things, but here I'm using it really slow, played right down the keyboard. So it sounds like this. And in the context of everything else, it's like, later on we use a kind of a drum fill for that. Just a much more obvious thing to do. But here I love the fact that you hear it like it's a percussion roll into the beat, but it clearly isn't. Just an interesting sound, and it's always nice to have some kind of weird stuff going on that you can use in place of things, that are kind of maybe a bit more standard. The way that the Mercury sound fits in. So all of these things, they're not shouting out of the track. It's just about creating a kind of tapestry, a kind of texture, where, the piano is the kind of hero instrument. And you've got that lovely combination of the two pianos that I'm using at the opening. And actually I'll put them both up so you can hear what they sound like in conjunction. And of course, I've absolutely rinse the hammer noise and the pedal noise, because I want those to trigger my giant hall reverb sound. I want all of that texture and detail that's in the mechanics of the piano to be fired out into the room and just sit there, with creating a kind of cloud of interesting noise. But they're both really good sounds, and they kind of work together to give you, I guess, the soft piano sitting behind the firewood piano. You're getting an upright and a grand piano together. So you've got a slightly different tonal balance, and you don't need very much of the super soft behind the firewood piano to just give you a little bit of a kind of 3D sound there. And then at the end here, I've gone for the kind of really traditional, the sound here. I've got the bright mics of all the selections. I've got the spot mics. I'm not using the mids. Room and then surround, effectively, the ambient mics, what we would call them, the ambient mics, those surround mics, in-air Lyndhurst, and that is giving you this kind of sound. I haven't actually used anything else on that. It's just literally the sound from the room, and that is doing this kind of epic. If I solo this, a little shimmy miss with the pedal there, but it kind of doesn't matter in context. I've just played this in, and I don't tend to over edit stuff. I won't go back unless I can hear something. I learned that from an amazing mix engineer called Brad Gilderman, who mixed an album that I produced, and he was making edits to vocals and just not going in and like crossfading everything meticulously as I always used to do. And I remember saying to him, "Oh God, I'm not going to crossfade that stuff." And he said, "Can you hear the edit?" I was like, "No." He said, "Then no." And it just made me think, right, okay, I get it. You're working fast and not wasting time going in and doing things that are kind of irrelevant. So when I hear that something isn't working or it bothers me, of course, I go in and fix it, replay it or edit it or whatever. But I wanted to work fast when I was writing this so that I could kind of keep the inspiration of what I had in my head. So let's have a listen just to this end section, because we've got the brass coming in here as well, and I'm going to show you what I'm using there. And the bulk of it is these patches from Abbey Road 1, and I love these. So Abbey Road 1 is obviously the kind of sketch tool, the orchestral sketch pad that you could use as a kind of introduction to you could use it on its own as the sound of Abbey Road, orchestrating Abbey Road, but it matches perfectly with the whole setup, everything that we did for the Abbey Road orchestra instruments. So you can mix and match those. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say, we've got quite a lot of stuff recorded for Abbey Road Orchestra that's not released yet. And we are back in Abbey Road this year. It's a very, very busy studio, as you can imagine. And they had a renovation, which they closed for a little while for. So we've had a pause in recording, but we're back in recording more stuff later this year. And there's lots of exciting stuff. I've heard some of the stuff and it's just mental. But here we go for the longs. And actually, if you go for a lower dynamic, it's lovely. Got a really beautifully thick sound. We've got the legato stuff with the thematic trumpets. And these fabulous horns. Beautiful stuff. What else have we got? Oh yeah, this was a free update for Albion 1 owners, the XL brass, huge brass sections, which have got this great stuff. And what else? I use the horns, and again it's this. When you want that kind of unreal brass sound. There's nothing like just having a big section and recording it in the hall and then just layering it up like that. I don't like to mess around for something that's supposed to sound natural like this. I don't like to mess around with it, putting it through outboard, harmonic exciters and all that kind of stuff. That is a sound. But for me, for this piece, it wasn't the right sound. But the way that I get that is you have something that's still unreal, because you wouldn't have like 30 trumpets, but something where you can get this kind of sound. It's a crazy loud sound, but it still sounds real, which is something that I really like. So what's going on here? Let's see. So these parts, actually, let's highlight all of these and get them soloed. Sounds like this. So this is all the Super XXL stuff together. And then obviously you get the kind of... So there I've used that to back up the parts from Abbey Road. So if I add those, you'll see that all that sounds like this. So you get the idea. It's really just kind of going for that, a nice big thick sound. And that takes me to the bottom of the session. I've got a couple of different things on the output. Let's cycle around this end section. And I'm going to turn everything off, and then I'll gradually add it back on so that you can see what's going on. So we start with the black box from Brainworks. This is an absolutely brilliant plugin. It's very easy to make it sound way too much on a mix bus. So I've been very careful with it, but I'll show you that. And then next up, the Oxford Inflator, and then finally FabFilters Pro L. I had Alicia up and didn't use it. That is a great plugin, but it just made it sound a little bit too synthetic for this particular track. So I'll add these one by one. You can see what's going on. So the reason there's a slight gain jump when I put the inflator on was because I cranked up the input only a tiny bit, but I cranked up the input a little bit so that I would get a bit hotter signal going into the Pro L. I guess all of this stuff is like it's just when it sounds right to your ears. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. But it's important to remember that you can use the gain staging. Gain staging is not like a set of rules that you absolutely have to stick to. Otherwise, the things that you need to be careful of if you're giving the track to somebody else. So you need to make sure that you haven't got such a weird mismatch in gain staging halfway through your chain that when that track comes out of the DAW that you're working at, it's blowing through the 0 dB limit or something like that. But for things like this, where you're just tweaking levels and it's your mix and you're finishing it off, there aren't any rules. It's not like, oh no, because the level jumps here, I've done something wrong. You just want to get it sounding so it sounds good to you. And some of these things, you won't want to change the level going into something or coming, for example, I didn't want the level going any hotter into the black box because that made it too saturated. So I decided to change level afterwards. In fact, I had it going much hotter into the black box. And if I go to the mix page, you'll see from these that I actually took the whole mix down by 2.1 dB once I started putting these mastering plugins on. And the other thing is, I generally quite like playing through the mastering chain, at least as close as I can get to it, once the composition has started to come together. so that I can feel a bit more kind of vibe coming from the session. But for some of these plugins, you get a lot of latency, and that makes programming percussion parts quite difficult. So for this track, I left everything off the output bus until I'd finished programming. And there was only the odd thing that I added after that. And it's actually quite hard playing ahead of the beat sufficiently, unless you're just quantizing everything, to get the rhythm stuff sounding right. It still seems to sit slightly later than you think, even however early you play it. But that's why I've kind of ended up, pulling all the faders down a bit and then adjusting stuff from there to get the right sound into the black box. So again, I'll just turn those back on again. In fact, let me find a place slightly earlier in the track. Let's use here. So you can hear the difference. And actually, if we go from where the synths come in here, and then turn it all off. It's really interesting. Just listen again. I love what it's doing, and it makes me think of, like, I don't even know. It makes me think of some kind of machine control where you've just gone like that, and it's kind of moved things around a little bit in the frequency spectrum. It's really interesting. I think a lot of these tools, you think of it, saturation, whatever. But when you put it on the master bus and you're very, very careful with the levels that you set on the different components, you can change the sound, not just so it becomes more saturated, but it brings certain qualities of certain parts of the mix forward in a really interesting way and makes the sound more interesting. So I really think of it as a properly creative tool. And then the inflator obviously is adding. We turn that off again. And I know it's a bit louder as well, but you can hear that again. It's reaching into the insides of the sound and kind of pulling bits upwards and just kind of lifting everything a little bit. Just a cool sound. And then the Pro L really was only put on to just keep things under control when it got hairy at the end. But actually, once you've got a little bit of stuff going, or even just in this quiet section in the middle, let's turn it off and then I'll play it with and without. Again, it is keeping things under control, but I'm using it. It's also making a very slight change to the sound and the balance of the individual parts within, which is really kind of pleasing to the ear. And a lot of this stuff is just experimenting. I've probably tried 10 different plugins before I settled on this combination. And I've got the mix so that I'm happy with the mix. It's not that. It's about just little tiny enhancements to the overall sound. So that's my track. My kind of celebration of the piano. Wanted it to be a tiny bit different, not just a beautiful piano piece, but actually something which showed a journey going through different kind of styles of music and how you might use these piano or piano related sounds, like Volker's incredible Hauschka library. These sounds that are derived from the sound of the piano, but are completely different in context. So let's have a listen through from the top. So that's my piece. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that there's some ideas that you can take in there and use in your own music, in your own tracks, whether it's production things or programming things, or just the way that you can use the piano and these extended sounds. We've got a lot of pianos and what you might call extended piano related libraries, which are all really useful for getting an interesting different sound into your tracks. And to celebrate Piano Week, we've got some bundles up. I think it's up to 40% off, and they're kind of piano-led bundles, but they've got some other interesting things in. So go and check those out on the website, and just enjoy writing with some of these great sounds, And again, as I often do, I want to shout out to some of the incredible artists and musicians we work with. So not only from the artists like Hauschka, Hans Zimmer, Jeremiah Freites, and going through the incredible players that have played on all of these beautiful libraries, the string players on the Appassionata and on the Abbey Road Orchestra series, the percussionists, the pianists, the brass players. We're really blessed with some incredible musicians, and blessed that they are interested in having people using the sound that they are able to make to be able to compose their own music. It's really fantastic. And I just want to remind you as well that from sales of all of our Spitfire audio libraries, royalties get paid to the musicians and the studios that we work with. And so by buying a product, you're also contributing to the music ecosystem. And it's incredibly important, especially right now when, music is starting to feel like an endangered species. It's really important that, that we keep supporting music, and we keep supporting live music as much as possible, and the musicians who create this beautiful, incredible sounds that we're able to use. So thank you very much for watching. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.